once again, of bringing everybody in this room together, all the agencies and departments, taking off our partisan hats for a day and simply understanding what our mission and vision is. So with that, I'm going to ask the Attorney General to stay here. I'm going to walk around with the microphone. You'll be asking some questions, I hope. I'll be asking some questions, I know. So please welcome Attorney General Maura Healey.
Hey, thank you.
So, well, I'm going to do my best Phil Donahue. Actually, I'll do Oprah Winfrey. You get a car, and you get a car. Yeah, right. No, this is the government. Come on. So, 1 second. Yeah. So, again, since taking office in 2015, correct? What do you think are some of the major challenges that faced you coming in, again, as a newly minted politician?
Well, Tom, I just want to say thank you to you and to your team for the incredible job that you do. It's really important, especially now that we have great people in government doing important work. So many of you in the room today are. I appreciate that. And Tom, I appreciate the partnership with your office. You know, I started in January 2015. I knew a little something about the office because I'd worked there for 8 years prior to that. But even so, I think that I was still struck by the breadth of the office. We cover soup to nuts, as many of you know. And so for me, a challenge is always making sure that we are hiring the very best folks out there who bring the kind of energy that we want to public service, but also that we think about using our resources wisely. Because at the end of the day, there's only so much to go around and so many lawyers and investigators and the like. So I think that's always a challenge. I'd like to think that we've been able to meet that challenge. One of the surprising things that people probably don't know is that we're a revenue generator for the state. We could talk more about that. But in addition to defending the state, in addition to bringing lawsuits where we think that Massachusetts residents' interests are at issue and have been violated, or certain things that have been done that hurt us as a state and hurt our folks, we're also out there collecting a lot of money on behalf of the state.
Thanks. So let me ask you this. As a former prosecutor, my experience in a district attorney's office was that there's always a fine line to be drawn between the political side of being an elected official and the obligations as a lawyer and a sworn law enforcement official to always, be doing what you believe is the right thing. So how did you deal with that going from a line prosecutor's perspective to the Attorney General?
Well, I guess in many ways, my job hasn't changed in the sense that, my job is to lead what we call the people's law firm and to make sure that we have people out there every day doing the work on behalf of the Commonwealth and the people in this state. More of my job probably involves being sort of the spokesperson for the work of the office. I recognize, Tom, that that's something that I have a responsibility to do that I didn't have when I was a division chief or bureau chief, but it's to be transparent with the public. It's to be out there explaining why we're taking actions, why we're doing certain things, sometimes sounding the alarm, ringing the bell on certain things that are happening. And that is, in some ways, I think, a necessary and important part of the job, because the public needs to know what the Attorney General's office is up to and how we're using resources. At the end of the day, laws are on the books. Laws reflect the decisions of policymakers. So sometimes when we take action, it may be labeled as political, but it's not. It's about doing our job and enforcing the laws that are informed and driven by policy considerations. And certainly there are times when you're deciding, and I guess this is where, if you want to talk about political, some of this comes in. I was elected. I ran on a particular platform. I think I was pretty clear with the public about the kind of law firm I wanted to run, and to really be about the people in this state and doing a lot of outreach, looking for ways to partner and the like. So I guess come November, politically speaking, the voters will have their opportunity to weigh in and say yay or nay to that. But the day-to-day work of the office has not changed, and what gets characterized by some, understandably in the media, as political, I honestly view as just doing my job.
So you use the term partnering, and one of the major things that we're focusing on here in the Commonwealth is the importance of government and business partnerships. And a lot of what we've discussed over the past couple of years has been the fact that if we don't build on these partnerships, we're not only going to lag behind technology and lag behind the private sector, but our constituencies are also going to say, hey, you know, we have this expectation for our government that can't lag behind the private sector by 10 years anymore. So what is it that you envision for your office, and what are you all working on that would be an interesting note in that subject?
In public-private partnerships.
Exactly.
The idea of partnerships. I'm such a big believer in this. You know, I think that the challenges that we face as a state, as a country right now, require everybody to be at the table. Government, NGOs, the business sector, it's just so important. And I think about a couple of examples out of my office. You know, the top priority for me remains the opioid crisis and combating real issues of behavioral health and substance use that have gone for far too long unaddressed in society. So one of the things in particular I'm focused on is, while we do everything we can to help those who are in need of treatment and care, we sure better be doing all we can when it comes to prevention and education to stop addiction before it sets in. I recognize there was no statewide curriculum programming for substance use education prevention in our schools. And so we developed a wonderful, I think, public-private partnership that we launched just a couple of months ago. It's called Project Here. And we partnered with the GE Foundation, who funded a $2 million effort to provide that kind of education in our public schools. And we brought in Chris Herron. As some of you know, Chris was a great basketball player who found himself addicted and has been in recovery, and he worked with us to help design some of the curriculum along with health resources. And it's been a great coming together of different entities, including a technology company. Because if you want to talk about meeting people where they are, particularly young people, you better be able to do it through a technology platform. And so part of what we delivered in a toolkit a couple months ago, and what's to come, will include a mobile app that will allow young kids to talk real time with folks who can answer questions about juuling, opioids, you name it, anything in this space, but also is going to enable them to get connected to organizations in their area for support, treatment options, and behavioral health coaches through Chris's network. So, like, that's an example, I think, of how important it is for us to work together. We couldn't fund that out of the Attorney General's office, but that's why it was terrific to have a partner step in. A similar partnership that's been really beneficial for us is one we launched a couple of years ago now. Our program, it's called Game Change. My office partnered with the New England Patriots and Northeastern Center for Sport and Society to launch a program in high schools, now we're in middle schools around the state, where we're teaching young people about how to identify the signs of stalking, bullying, teen dating violence, domestic violence, and then through a year-long curriculum, teaching them how to be upstanders, you know, teaching them how to develop the skills to recognize those issues and take them on, you know. And as somebody who a lot of times, Tom, as you know, we're dealing with problems on the back end. Bad stuff's already happened. That's why it's coming through our door. I'm a big believer in using, in particular, public-private partnerships to make the investments on the front end so that you can reduce, in this instance, likelihood of violence, likelihood of addiction, so that we head off problems before they actually set in. And I think that's something that's really possible if you have a willingness to think about, you know, what everybody brings to the table. My friend Jim Rooney at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, right? I mean, we recognize that student loan debt is a huge problem for families here, you know, all across the state. And we got to get a handle on it. So he and I convened an advisory group to work on student loan debt and to come up with recommendations for families about how to take that on, how to look at it, what kinds of things we should be thinking about in terms of higher education and the financing of that education. But again, only can happen because everybody's at the table.
So that brings up an interesting point. I know last night on 60 Minutes there was a piece on education equality, and particularly as it relates to diversity inclusion from folks who are from lesser advantaged communities. And one of the things that we have been talking about for several years now is the fact that we have to attract, great young folks who are graduating from our STEM programs, who are graduating from our academic programs, who are going to be interested in coming to work and serving the public, as so many of us have chosen to do. But that's a challenge. It's a challenge from a technology standpoint. It's also a challenge from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. So I know one of the first things that you did when you took office was to examine the issue of gender parity and certainly gender pay parity. And you met that challenge very quickly and very appropriately. One, how did you do that? And what would you do in terms of letting folks know here what you're looking forward to in the future relative to, again, getting those folks to come in, sorry for the compound question, getting those folks to come into public service and making sure that we're utilizing those partnerships to support that generation?
I mean, it's just so important, you got to set the conditions and make it possible, and then you've got to be really aggressive and persistent in terms of outreach and effort to recruit the kind of workforce that's going to be the kind of workforce that we should all be proud of, and that's going to yield more productivity in terms of bottom lines. You study corporate boards, right? The ones that are more productive, the ones that have a better bottom line, those companies tend to be the ones with greater diversity on their boards. And so, whether it's an economic imperative or whether it's around an imperative to support equality, the bottom line for me is for far too long, we've left a lot of people out of the mix who bring skills, talents, and ability, and we're stupid. Sorry, that's a harsh word, but we're foolish to be leaving people out of the mix and not harnessing their talents, not harnessing their abilities. A lot has changed, but certainly we have a long ways to go when it comes to diversity and inclusion. One of the first things I did when I took office was to provide paid family leave to my team. Again, this is about setting the conditions. We had 6 weeks of paid family leave available to employees in the office. I think that's important. Supporting policies within your office that will remove some of what has been in place in terms of barriers or obstacles, for people to be able to stay in jobs, keep jobs, be promoted in jobs is important. We also did unconscious bias training right out of the gate for every single employee in the Attorney General's office. We all carry with us certain stereotypes and perceptions. It's natural. I remember recently I was in a classroom in Boston, and I was talking to little kids about the role of the Attorney General, and they understood it. They sort of understood what I did and the power, the authority behind the office. Towards the end, a gentleman walked in through the back of the room wearing a suit, and a little boy put his hand up and said to me, "Is he your boss?" Because he was a white man wearing a suit. And so it's just to say, part of what we got to do is change the lens on that. And part of that was instituting unconscious bias training. It was also changing the way we hire. We went from one hiring protocol to panel hiring, where we have sort of a breadth of diversity and experience within the office on a single hiring panel. Panel always includes somebody from my diversity and inclusion committee. You got to be really intentional. And I'm proud of the progress we've made. We've got a ways to go, but right now, for example, my first assistant, my deputy, head of my state police unit in the office, the majority of my bureau chiefs, the majority of employees, and the majority of attorneys in the office, as well as my state solicitor, all women. And that's new, and I think it's important. It's important to me when I get reports back about what our new employee training looks like right now. Every couple months we do that, and to go in the room and see a greater diversity reflected is important, because at the end of the day, especially for us in government, we better reflect the communities we serve. We'll be more informed, about the work we need to do, and I think it's where we need to be. But it is hard work. It's not a soundbite or a slogan, and it's not a one-time event each year. It's got to be a sustained sort of effort, I think, Tom, in order for us to get there.
Thank you, General. So can we ask folks in the crowd if they want to ask some questions? Anybody want to ask the Attorney General a question? Thanks.
This is fun. Usually I'm upstairs, Ask the AG, with Jim and Marjorie, so this is a little different today.
Hi, Attorney General. I'd like to applaud your efforts nationally and locally in being a hammer for the state of Massachusetts to keep people from doing stuff to us. The question I have is in regards to opioid addiction. Recently, a drug dealer was convicted of manslaughter for an addict dying from his disease. And I'm wondering if I know you can prosecute the prescribers, you can prosecute other people for that, but we've never really had the opportunity to convict these drug dealers of manslaughter, murder, or anything like that. I'm wondering if the Attorney General's office would be moving towards more of doing that to help protect these victims from these things.
Yeah. Oh boy. I'll just say that everything needs to be on the table when we look at what we need to do to combat this crisis. You're right, I went after some of the prescribers who were prescribing off the charts early on because we really needed to change the culture and the practices around pills. We've made some progress. I think there's still more to be made, though, from accounts I'm hearing from the field. We worked around dispensing practices, right, to change how pharmacists were reviewing the database before handing out certain opioids. That work needs to continue. I'm a big-time believer in the prevention and education because the best way to stop addiction is to stop it before it sets in. But on the criminal enforcement work, I've increased resources sixfold since I took office in this space. And we have taken kilos and kilos of heroin, fentanyl off of the streets. That work has got to continue. In terms of what other laws might be available, I mean, we've spent a lot of time busting up and disrupting major drug trafficking rings, organizations that are wreaking havoc through distribution networks all over the state. We've partnered a lot with folks in New Hampshire as well, where we see an overlap in Maine. I think that it all depends on the circumstances, whether or not it's appropriate, whether or not a certain charge can be made out. But I think I put our record up against anybody in terms of how aggressive we've been. We always need more resources, I'll tell you that, to go after these major networks and the drug traffickers who are out there. And we got to continue to do that. But I do believe, though, that more of our investment needs to come in the form of prevention and education. Really like big time that, and getting a handle on behavioral health and how to make that truly accessible to more people. We've got to figure this out. It's complicated, I know, but we got to do that. But I appreciate absolutely the sentiment. I start any number of days in the office by picking up the phone and calling a family member who's written to me to say, I've lost my loved one. What can you do? And that continues to drive and animate us every day. But thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Do we have any other questions for the Attorney General? Just raise your hand.
You all want lunch now?
Yeah, what you're bumping up against lunch. So let me just ask you this, General. What do you see as being what the next portion of your tenure as Attorney General is? What do you envision for us as a Commonwealth?
Well, I think we got to continue to do what we've been about. In a time when a lot of people are feeling vulnerable and voiceless, we got to be there for them. And I've seen far too much of an abdication of responsibility by the federal government when it comes to protecting workers from getting their wages stolen, protecting clean air and clean water, protecting consumers, ensuring a level playing field, when it comes to sort of proposed mergers and acquisitions and what's happening. And I think as a state, and certainly directly as an office, we've got to be there to make sure that we are holding the line and that somebody's out there making sure that laws that are on the books are getting enforced. I think that Massachusetts has got to continue to lead. We've had a strong tradition here, Tom, and this is such a wonderful place, this library, and you can explore so many of the exhibits that reflect the great history of not only this town, but this state. where we've been. And I think that we need to continue to lead as a state on fronts. I'm going to continue to deal with whatever's coming our way. Some of it you predict, some of it you don't predict, but you just got to deal with. And so, if I'm filing a lawsuit because Scott Pruitt's doing things that hurt our clean energy economy, it's where we've got to be. If I'm going to file a lawsuit because we got to defend people's access to health care, given that we pioneered universal access to health care, that's where I'm going to be. So I hope that what we see in the next few years is a decrease in the coarse and discourse and incivility that we see generally. I hope that we see folks elected this fall to Congress who will find a way to work with one another and actually get stuff done, because as I go around the state, as I go around the country, there's far more commonality in terms of people's interests than what many would like to exploit as dividing us. And I think we need steady leadership and work from those of us in government. I know a lot of you around the room work in government, and I think it's really important now more than ever for all of us to do our jobs with integrity, with professionalism. It bothers me when folks in government get a bad rap, because I know the sacrifices that many have made, not just monetary, not just financial, but at the end of the day, you're presented with people who are coming with profound issues, and you're you're the place of last resort. And so I want to see continued great work out of people here in Massachusetts doing the great job they can do to help people, to make a difference, and lead right now. I think a lot of people, it's like Belichick says, just do your job, And I think if we all just keep doing our job, we'll be a better state for it, and we'll certainly be better for our families and our communities.
Well, I will say that, even looking at our audience today of state leaders from around the state, I mean, we're clearly making advancements as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and I think that's an important core point that all of us have in common is the objective of making sure that we don't just simply have one opinion in the room. And I think to what the Attorney General was saying, we really are a unique state in so many ways. I mean, there's much less of the partisan diatribes that go on, outside of us. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I know it full well. But the fact is that here we are in Massachusetts. We're all really should be looking to do the same thing. And if you use the Charles River and the rowing and crewing that goes on the Charles River as an example, it's a lot easier for a boat to move forward if everybody's rowing in the same direction. But when we're rowing against each other, you go nowhere. So with that, I'd like to thank the Attorney General and for her leadership.
Thank you.